everyone, welcome. My name is Chris Wood and I'm here live from the Jack Blanton Museum of Art in downtown Austin. Today we're going to be taking our first of a series of walks through the museum, our first ever Art Odyssey. You'll be looking at works of art that we've talked about in class, maybe seen in our textbooks, and some new works that are going to be a complete surprise. So I hope that you can join me on our Art Odyssey. Let's go head on inside and take a look and see what we can see.
For those of you who don't know, the Jack S. Blanton Museum of Art is one of the largest university art museums in the United States. It was begun in 1963 as the University Art Museum on the campus of the University of Texas at Austin. The first stop on our Art Odyssey tour today is this geometric style amphora dating from 770 to 760 BCE. It's geometric because it has meander patterns on the neck and horizontal lines. These flourished during the geometric period. We don't actually see a whole lot of figures on vases, but you'll also see their vertical leaves on the belly, forecasting or anticipating the naturalistic figurative motifs that become prevalent after 700 BCE. Next, we have a wonderful example of a Middle Corinthian kylex. That's a wine cup dating to the 6th century BCE. And as you can see, we have 3 zones, each of which contains a parade of animals, real and imaginary. There are lions and sphinxes and boars. Some are grazing animals and some are hunting animals. We tend to lump these kinds of motifs into something we call the Orientalizing period, where Greek pottery is replicating what they see imported from the Near East. By far one of my most favorite pieces is this red figure kylex dating to 430 BCE. On the exterior of the cup we find a pair of hypnotic eyes, while on the interior is the gruesome face of a gorgon. Of course, those of you familiar with the myth of Perseus and Medusa will recall the Gorgon's power to turn all mortals to stone. Imagine the shock if you were given this cup at the Greek symposium, and as you slowly sip away your wine, you find the cold grimace of the Gorgon glaring up at you. Next, we have a red figure Lekythos depicting the winged goddess of victory Nike. In her right hand, she holds a libation bowl, called the fiale, and in her left hand, she holds a type of lyre called a kithara. The fiale is a common religious symbol, symbolizing the ritual pouring out of mixed and unmixed wine, with prayers, and the kithara is an instrument associated with dances and epic recitations, odes, and lyric songs. It's very possible that the image of victory in this instance, associated with a funerary oil container, may indicate victory over death. Here we have a Roman portrait bust of a bearded man dating from the 2nd century to early 3rd century AD. Now, what you'll notice first and foremost is this is quite a departure from our veristic or true view of Romans. It's also not the classical style per se. We're not seeing Pericles' portrait here. We're seeing the inclusion of a beard, which, as we know, most Roman males did not sport until the time of Hadrian. Speaking of which, if you look closely, you can see the detail in the beard and hair, the fine drill work, but also the eyes are drilled, and this is something that begins with the Hadrianic period.
Hey everyone, welcome back. I hope you've enjoyed today's Art Odyssey. We're going to take a few final questions before we leave today via the feed. And I have one to start off. This is from a Latin 3 student who asks, why do we see so much pottery in museums? That's a very good question. Ancient pottery is nearly indestructible. I mean, you can roll over it with a tractor. It'll break, sure, but it will survive the archaeological record. It's a great artifact to find because, as you know, when we talked about this in class, there are lots of examples of using pottery to write on. There's lots of art on there that can give us a narrative about the kinds of stories that the Greeks and Romans like to hear. So yeah, pottery is fantastic for archaeologists. Second question here comes from a Latin 4 student. What is it with all the sticks I see on statues? Okay, by sticks, if you mean supports, that is there to help obviously support a statue. So a lot of the statues that existed in the ancient world had been melted down, the bronze statues. So what we find typically are a lot of Roman copies of ancient Greek statues. And these copies are a little top heavy. If you remember the bust of the Roman that we saw in the Blanton with his nose smashed, that's what happens if a statue isn't supported correctly. So you're gonna find artists getting really creative with how to include a support, but kind of make it melt into the background. So that's why we see these like crazy logs. Sometimes we find like big baskets supporting these statues and they seem a little out of place. But remember, the artist kind of has to find a way of supporting the statue, and he's just, or she's just trying to be creative with it. Okay, one final question. Were statues in the ancient world always white? That is a most excellent question, and the answer is no. No, most statues actually were just the opposite. They were very colorful. We hear examples, historical examples. Pausanias talks about having to see statues from the ground that are up on the tympanum. That's the triangular part of your temple. And a lot of those statues, if you can imagine, they're kind of far away from the ground view, so you have to make them stand out in some way. And using color is definitely a way to do that. So whenever you try to visualize how statues looked in the ancient world, always try to remember that they did have some sort of color associated with them. And with marble, if you can imagine painting some of these marble to look human, giving them fleshy tones, but there's this kind of translucent stone underneath, almost makes them glow. It's just fantastic. If you've ever seen a reconstruction, you'll see this, and it is all very haunting to look at some of these statues and go, wow, that looks near human. Conservationists and scholars are always reconstructing some of these ancient colors, and it's really difficult. There have been some examples where, for example, making Augustus lifelike with color has kind of gone a little overboard, and he's given him a lot of red hair. A lot of this is guesswork. We use things like ultraviolet light to detect original pigments, but bear in mind that a lot of these pigments have changed over time. It is difficult to find the original kind of ingredients to reshape or recast these figures, so we're not going to see maybe a true sense. For some really good clues about how people dressed, what color togas or peploses they wore, you might want to take a look at some wall painting from Pompeii, like for example in the National Archaeological Museum in Naples. You'll see a lot of these wall paintings that have been preserved from Pompeii, and they show pretty much how people dressed in the ancient world. They show a lot of mythological figures too, so again, you have to go, is there a reason why that color is being used for that dress or that toga? It may not be everyday wear, it may be a special occasion. So we keep all of these things in mind as art historians and archaeologists when we're looking at ancient statues. Well, again, thank you all for joining me today for Art Odyssey. I hope to see you all back here real soon, and take care, stay safe, stay healthy.